Week 8 of Planetary Qualifiers and Secrets of Power is in the books. We have a lot of limited results, a couple cancellations, and some cool decks to talk about tonight. I'm Jordan from the Colorado Cantina Crew, here to break down all of the meta from this past week, getting you ready for your next event, whether it's regionals in a few weeks, a PQ next week, or for some of us, some stupid store showdowns that we have to bring some jank decks to. Joining me tonight, Kyle and Sharkey. How's everybody doing? Sharkey, what's up?
Oh, not a lot. The jank decks are burning a hole in my pocket. I got to bring them out. So
yeah, if not you, who?
Exactly.
Yeah, it was a good weekend, right? We got to cast a PQ, so that was a lot of fun. Wasn't playing, but felt very involved in what was going on, and watching decks and some great games.
Yeah, too involved. You guys could go watch it on the channel. I think it was like 10 hours of coverage. Maybe not 10, maybe not quite 10, but a very long day. I was very tired afterwards, but some good stuff overall. Those are some of the decks that we'll be talking about tonight as well. As we get through looking at this week, it's a little bit more of the same with a couple decks that are catching our eye from the cool perspective, but also from the trend perspective. We were chatting before the show, kind of talking about it's that time in the season where things are crystallizing, but there's also a lot of competition ahead. There's also a lot of things to do and a lot of things to get ready for. So that's what we're going to do tonight. So yeah, let's just kick it off with the PQ that we casted in Madison. Like I said, it could be it's on our channel. You go check it out. It's on late night as well. As you look at this tournament, it might not be super representative to the field, but one deck that really stood out to me and in general, I think to everybody watching the stream overall, was probably this Sabine Tarkentown list, the eventual winner. And part of the reason why I want to start here is just from a little bit of a trend perspective. Do we think that this type of deck can make a little bit of a foothold in the meta, or is it just like excellent play by Xavier here, Osmond Blaze? It's actually a back-to-back PQ win at that store. So what do we think overall, Sharky?
Well, I would start by saying I hope so, because this deck is really cool. Realistically, I'm not 100% sure. It did go through some matchups that I would have thought may not have been the best for him, including a couple Yoda Data Vaults, if I remember right. And with the way it was able to handle those, that maybe it does have some sticking power. I'd have to see a bit more. There's a couple I can think of that might be problematic, but I'd be interested to see if it gets any traction going.
Kyle?
Yeah, I think we've got some historical data to help guide our knowledge here. As you stated, this is a back-to-back PQ winner. Now, this was the previous set, but the last time this guy won a PQ with very close to this deck, you started to see it everywhere. I saw it on locals. I saw it in my preparation. I saw it playing. And then it kind of disappeared a couple weeks later. So I guess the question is that going to be the same again? I'm sure you're going to run into it soon. Kind of in the arms race, it was a good call for right now, right? As we've progressed in the meta, we had this like go bigger, go bigger, go bigger arms race going on. And this is a hyper fast deck that goes, all right, well then I'm just going to come all the way underneath and get you. And that's what happened to Loopy in the finals, that's for sure.
Yeah, and if we look at the path that Xavier had to traverse, we had Palpatine yellow in the first round, which sounds pretty good. That's as a Sabine Tarkentown player, that's how you want to start your day. Followed by Han Solo 1 green, Han 1 yellow, which was his only loss of the day, Poe ECL, Boss Tarkentown, Thrawn yellow, Yoda Data Vault, Han 2 ECL, another Thrawn, and then eventually in the finals, our buddy Loopy on Kylo Data Vault. So a pretty solid mix of things, whether it's aggro or really far sides of control. But yeah, you're right. This deck really did go everywhere for the last couple of weeks of that set as we saw it come up. I think we casted that PQ, or I casted that PQ as well. But I think this deck got a lot of new tools that makes it kind of interesting to talk about. Obviously, there's no data to look at from a Sabine Tarkentown perspective, but also in that PQ, we saw some pretty good play from Ryan Warner, Rebel Resource, on Sabine Yellow, and that had me kind of thinking about aggro at large. And then as we're diving into some of the data today, we saw Kylo Yellow top 8 at a PQ, and I just wonder if we're at that spot where things might be moving a little faster for certain areas of the meta. Obviously, on the other side, we'll talk about in a second the full meta breakdown from this week, in which we saw Piet be very popular, and he's very opposite of what we're talking about, right, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, this deck would crush Piet. I don't need any data to tell me otherwise. I can tell you right now, Piet has no shot into this deck, right? So, again, going back to the well position we just talked about, the run that this guy had, the only two matchups I really look at that I would have thought he'd have been like pretty unfavored in would have been the Han 1 yellow and the Han 1 green, because they're just both starting with 30 and saying, let's race. And it looks like that was his one loss, but he did beat the greens. So, yeah, I like that this is a part of the meta, though, right? That's the part we've talked about before. We don't want an only grind meta. I don't want an only control arms race, get bigger meta. There has to be space for an aggro deck to come in and just sweep everybody if that's what they're doing. And so I think it's great.
Yeah, and whether it's great or not great, we did see throughout the week it not be super reflected everywhere. Obviously, as we look at the leader in base spread here on Swoop Base, we still see Yoda as the most represented deck, coming back from a couple down weeks, not in that top spot. But what's interesting to me, Sharky, is that it's not Han 2 ECL that's in the top spot. It's Admiral Piet. And not to say that Han Solo, Han 2 ECL isn't really high up here. We're talking about 5.7%, 333 compared to 367. We are missing data from two events. They're relatively small. Like we said, a lot of cancellations because of the snow and a lot of limited PQs. So if it looks like a slightly smaller data set, that's why. But Sharky, let's talk about this Piet situation where not only is it staying where it's at, but it's growing in popularity at this point. Is anything changing? I haven't seen any really additions to the deck, any sort of branches of creativity or anything like that.
I'm not sure if it's growing so much as staying the same while everything else seems to be fluctuating around it. And it's kind of like the Boba effect from last set,
Okay,
where everyone's running Boba Data Vault anyway, regardless of whether it's a good plan or not, just because it's got a linear game plan, you know how to play it, and sometimes it just spikes for you. I believe that's what we're seeing here with this Piet red deck that probably hasn't changed in 2 months. Like you might have a card or two different, but it's effectively the same deck as it's been the whole time, and it's not particularly difficult to get the game plan down, so it's pretty easy to just pick up and go. And I believe another factor, like you were mentioning earlier about it being the next one up over like Han green, for example, is that actually Han seems to have split into two directions in the ECL and blue variants. So while yes, I think the Piet red deck is there as the current highest raw number, I do believe if you start accounting for all of the Han Solo decks, they'll start to
you're right,
creep back up there.
And forgive the mistake on my end, I had the wrong filter selected, so it's even worse. Piet was the most popular deck this weekend, not necessarily that third spot. A lot of different filters as we could mess around with here, but I do kind of wonder if it's because of some of the changes to the meta overall. I think that I might feel more confident with Piet into like a Han 1 yellow than I would into a Han 2 ECL. I'm not sure about that, but from a general perspective, I feel like they don't have as many answers to the big ship type of thing, and they're probably not killing you fast enough. Could be wrong there. There's not a ton of data in that matchup. We could pull up all the matchup spreads, and Han 1 yellow is really, 10, 12, usually single digit total matchups to look at. But Kyle, as you look at Yoda going down a little bit, obviously in play rate and success over the past few weeks, we see Han 2 Blue having various degrees of success from different forms, whether it's 30, 35, or Force 28. And then we see that spike from Tarkin Town and the Mesa Week and all these different things. Is that leading us to a spot where decks like Piet might go a little bit higher in the meta, or do you think it's something that's causing something like Anakin to come back at some point, or is there any movement that you're looking at that is interesting to you at all?
I mean, I would think this would be worse for Piet, right? I mean, the worst possible matchup for Piet is hard aggro, and if we're going to see more Sabine, if we're going to see more really aggressive decks, then that should push it down. But, as we're discussing, it never seems to go down. It kind of sits where it is. It's not a deck I would play, especially into this meta, and I think it probably gets worse going into it. As far as things pushing up, more maybe blue-green villain. We have been seeing a little bit more of that, although a really aggro Sabine is not good for the blue-green villain either, right? So, I think we are getting to the point where it's a little, of a triangle or rock, paper, scissors, whatever you want to call it, where, all three kind of avenues are getting more and more well-defined, and you kind of got to pick which avenue you want to go, and then, try to defeat or defend against your worst matchups the best you can, either through sideboard or practice.
Yeah, and so we say all this negatively about Piet, but they did win a PQ this weekend. Here's the list. It's just on Spoo Base real quick. It seems really standard for what we're seeing. I mean, the Ohm series and Power failure in the side almost feel a little memey in nature, where like I doubt they're a core part of anything that's going on here, Sharky. But the reason that I ask about it is because we are seeing some weird things pop up. So the question is it just the time for weird things in the season, a la this Sabine Tarkentown or this Cad Blue that made the finals in this Fort Wayne PQ that we'll talk about a little bit later? But is it just a circumstance that happens where we get to the spot in the set where things are kind of, grinding to a halt in terms of overall interest and just creativity, and then that creates some room for some of these more showdown type decks to do well at these smaller events?
I would have probably said it's a little bit of a combination, right? So like the aggro stuff popping up makes sense because I believe that there is a spot right now, or like kind of like a gap that can be filled by a relatively heavy aggro kind of list. And a lot of times you're going to see that filled by Han. Like Han 1 yellow is a relatively aggro deck that can fill that spot. But that doesn't mean that there has to be Han specifically to do that. So Sabine Tarkentown being a great example of, well, the gap was wide enough that a really, really aggro deck can just come in and sweep everybody. We're also getting, I don't even remember how many weeks in we are now, but I would say most of the way through what would be the conclusion of this meta, because in the first week of March is when we start seeing rotation and new set. So we're starting to get people who are like, it's more fun to play with this deck than the other deck. And so they bring that out.
Yeah.
Well.
So we have 5 weeks left in the season. Week 13, the final week, is a 7 PQ event. It's a little off screen here because we're zoomed in. That's the week following regionals. The week of, Kyle, regionals is the 27th, right?
Yeah, I believe so. We're about a month away.
Yeah, so I guess there are no PQs that weekend, or maybe it's just a long weekend date-wise. This is saying week 13 is the 28th to the 1st, and then week 12 is the 21st to the 22nd. So there are, give or take, about 65, 70 events left in the set from a PQ perspective. But yeah, I think those are fair points overall, Sharky. And as you look at it, Piet, from a top 8 perspective, is right here in this green line that we see. Spiking in week 5 a couple weeks ago with I think that's 5 PQs, 5 top 8s in that week. So really low for a deck that's being played that much, and then kind of pittering at it. It's kind of ironic that the week that it finally spikes a win is the one where it's actually not being represented in top 8 and likely not driving past that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, like, if you know how to play both with and against Piet, then you are at a significant advantage. It's not particularly hard game plan to pick up on either. So sometimes it just rolls you, and sometimes you just, I didn't draw resupply, so game 2.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about a little bit last week as we were getting back from Mesa that Han 1 yellow really isn't a easy deck to pick up. Right, that we had some doubt about how much it would factor into what's going on this weekend, and since it's all the way down here at the bottom, it's kind of hard to see the meta share here. But I have it selected. But what we did see is that it is really it is converting at a solid rate. So this is in week 1. Obviously, no one's playing it at this point. But as we get up to week 8 here, had a 6.3% conversion rate. Obviously, as we're talking about how well it did at Mesa with 3 players being in the top 12, obviously that's a far cry what we're looking from this week. But, overall there was 2 champions this week, 22 people played it, 6 makes the top 8. Seems pretty good.
Yeah, my gut would say that looking at that trend line, if you were to pull up the Yoda trend line, you're going to see the inverse. So Han, had a good start at the beginning when Yoda didn't really exist. We were in the Anakin days. And then you see it plummet as Yoda gets really popular. And then you see it come back up as Yoda's starting to go down a little. I mean, Yoda's still holding pretty strong, but I don't see it as much as we did even at our own PQ in Pueblo just a couple weeks later.
Yeah, I think the Yoda swings have been pretty severe obviously in week 4 here, we see it really going downhill as we get into that period, like a week or two going into second. That's always also the holiday week after that, going into, I think, New Year's would have been that weekend. But overall, I think that Han 1 yellow is going to be here to stay for the rest of the set. I think if you're going to Mesa, if you're going to Milwaukee, this is a deck that I think is going to be more popular week by week. I think that if you weren't feeling confident in taking Han out to an event this past weekend, seeing the results and seeing it not just be these elite Han 1 players doing well with it, I think gives you some confidence and motivation to get out there and do it yourself.
Yeah, Han 1 yellow is a menace for any 25 HP aggressive deck, right? Be it ECL or Tarkin Town, especially with these haulers that are hard to kill with a Tarkin Town. And it makes a lot of sense, right? As we're seeing, Han 2 ECL, we're seeing some of these Tarkin Town decks pop up, Sabine, that sort of thing. Han 2 is going to be a problem. I've got 5 more HP and a card called Cunning that says I win the race most of the time. So, we're going to definitely see it. You're right. I don't expect it to go down. If anything, maybe people trying to bring it up.
So here is the Han 1 yellow matchup data for the entire set, right? So like I said, it's pretty slim here, right? Like I think the biggest matchup, the most data that we're seeing here is a 30 data set with Yoda. And compared to some of the other quote unquote top decks, that's really, really minor, Sharkey.
It's not a lot. I expect that to probably spike just because, like you said, it when a deck wins a big tournament, it tends to get a little more popular. Though Han also has a suppressing effect because sometimes his play lines are just weird to see. But like we were talking earlier, I think also that particular deck has issues into Yoda and does pretty well into basically everything else on that line. So it's kind of an interesting, almost anti-aggro deck. It's probably going to be, like we were asking earlier, if we're going to see more Sabine Target Towns. I think Han Yellow might be the reason that we don't, in that one is probably going to be more popular than the pick your aggro deck variant of the week, but I could see Han Solo Yellow being the reason that we don't see too many others. So.
Yeah, I mean, Cunning is just hard to race again. It's been that thing going back to any set we could talk about, right? Whether it's double yellow Han with the Rebels going at the end of set 1 into set 2, or any sort of thing with Cunning, it becomes a really big challenge to race. Hell, when Kazuda came out and we were trying the different variants of him, it was just like, yeah, if this is a super aggro meta and Django doesn't exist, Cunning would be awesome, right? Yep. So I think all those things are really valid. I guess my question is, I've always been someone that has really enjoyed the Han 1 play lines. I'm not saying it's an easy deck to play, and I think it's easier now than it was when the Tech DJ stuff was around, because you really wanted to use your resources in a different way, and you had to angle towards that DJ play in a way that wasn't going to get you blown out. But what I'm kind of looking at now is it less that it's a hard deck and more that it's just intimidating based on public perception?
Yeah, I think it would just depend on who's sitting across from me with it, right? I think there definitely is in SWU this concept of intimidation factor. I can tell that there, even in a local at a much smaller level, there are some people I will sit across from, and intimidation is part of the game. But as you go to the macro level with somebody like Ophir or some of these players that are known for Han Yellow, I'm sure just going, oh man, I have to play against this person on Han Yellow, you kind of just start mentally behind.
So I hear that. I meant more from the perspective of playing the deck yourself and the perception you're looking at, whether people say it's a hard deck or it's actually a hard deck.
Yeah, I think with Han specifically, knowing what to put down as your resource and when to use Han's ability does have a lot more cascading effects than a lot of other leader abilities. And because of that, it's always going to have a bit of a barrier to entry, I think is the right way to put it. Now, is it as bad as it used to be? No. But that doesn't change the fact that it's got more of a barrier to entry than, say, Piet. I
would be interested I started talking before I fully finished listening to you, which is a problem. But I think it's unfair to compare Piet to Han in this perspective.
Right? I just wanted to give an extreme example.
Yeah, right? Okay. It's very hyperbolic. But I'm glad that from an overall perspective. My thing is that like personally I think that Yoda is a harder deck to play than Han 1. Any variant of Han 1 that I've played. I think that sometimes a deck like and I know I'm gonna get like railed in the comments for this, but I think that like sometimes a deck like Sabine could be more challenging than Han 1 Yellow. Just from the perspective of like how you get yourself to those reach positions when you're in those unfavorable matchups to get over the edge. But I know I'll probably get railed for that. But I think that the part of Han that I've always been really drawn to is like the flexibility that his leader ability gives you, plus a lot of the cards that happen to have smuggle in the yellow variant to understand when you're putting a card down for what reason. I think that really is the crux of it, but maybe I'm crazy for thinking it's not too complex.
I'll support you a little and say that there are very common play lines. I think if you look at if you were to play 100 matches of Han, you would find a very significant trend line of when you would activate the Han ability. And probably on turn 1 and turn 4 would be the most frequent times you're going to use that ability. And rarely would you use it on turn 2 or outside of there unless you were really reaching for something.
Yeah.
So I think to your point, it can be learned, right? You learn at some point, it's like, it's not that complicated when I know I'm almost all the time going to use it here and here. Although comparing it to Yoda, I think Yoda's the same way. I mean, when you first start playing Yoda, you learn the complication of your My Only Hope and then specific targets of when you should ramp. But it's very similar in that way. Once you learn those kind of common play lines, then it becomes kind of muscle memory from there. So I'd put them on the same plane, not one over the other.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that there are kind of some differences here. Okay, so looking at SWU competitive hub here for a second, as we check out some of the tournaments that don't have data, just to catch you up on the things that we're looking at. Limited, small PQ in Mexico. Then we have a small PQ in Canada, small PQ in Puerto Rico, canceled PQ in Greenville, South Carolina. I believe it's saying 52 people. Let's click into it and find out. No data available. Let's check the melee.
Excuse me.
And it looks like this has been postponed to February 8th. So overall, even though it is a small data set, we look at it, we're not missing too much. As I look down a little bit further, one thing that stood out to me was that GAR ECL is always somewhere. You know, like it's always popping up once or twice a week. Miami PQ, 50 people. Overall, do you think that GAR is a deck that you would put time into if you were going to regionals, Sharky?
I think it's a cool deck. Would I put time into it? I don't know. It's on the borderline. It's one of those that feels like it's not quite fast enough to be the aggro spike you need it to be, and it's not quite big enough to go over the top of a lot of those either. It has matchups that it absolutely blows out, but I don't know that I like the consistency of it. That's my only drawback for it, basically ever. It's a really fun deck, and it's a really cool deck. I just think it has some issues being not fast enough and not big enough at the wrong times.
Kyle?
Yeah, it's a deck that I did spend time on. I think if you guys recall, I started trying to trade for a GAR showcase because I thought it was a deck that I wanted to significantly try for PQ season. I thought that it had some great matchups. Anakin was, when we thought Anakin was going to be the thing, GAR is a good answer to Anakin in a number of ways, being able to pop a leader with ECL, Vader, that sort of thing. So early on, yes. The more I played it, the more I felt like that there was certain decks or matchups that I would run into that I would just get blown out by that I didn't feel good with. So I didn't like that. This week there was one interesting deck. I would call it, a wolf in sheep's clothing version of GAR, and that's the Lama Su deck that made the top 8. It's basically just GAR with Lama Su. So the question is, does it aid in the deck, or should you have just been playing GAR?
That player
but it is
probably
cool.
just didn't have the GAR showcase.
Yeah.
As we'll go over to that deck in a second, but as we're kind of cleaning up some of the PQs that don't have data set up, this is the Washington DC PQ. I'm not sure if they didn't finish the event. I assume they did finish the event. They stopped reporting after the semis. Probably just, if I had to guess, a late night, and they did it by hand and didn't update Melee yet, and maybe the tournament organizer hasn't worked yet or something like that. I would imagine we'll see that getting updated. But we saw Duncan Howard in the finals, I believe, is what I saw elsewhere. Okay, let's go over to that Lamasu deck, as Kyle was mentioning. We got a bunch of random decks to talk about. So this is from New Zealand. I think there was like 40 people at that PQ, so kind of representative, not too small, not too big. What stood out to you outside of the Mandalorian's armor upgrade, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the bones of this deck, it is very similar to Gar, and you're kind of doing a similar thing to her of trying to take advantage of upgrades, just in a different way. Of course, with Gar, you get the little bonus automatically, and then with Lamasu, we're going to kind of handle upgrades in a different way. But some of the bones are still the same. You're trying to ECL Vader. You're trying to get your God, who's that 3-cost guy that gets more and more big? Yeah,
Axe.
him, right? Yeah. Yeah, I hate Axe Wolves. Anyway, but very similar idea and deck here. I haven't played this deck, but mechanically, I imagine it works the same. You try to get a small unit going right away. You start plotting upgrade, pounding upgrades, and then hit your ECL Vader to kind of swing the game in your favor, and then try to close out soon after. But it's a cool deck.
One card that always stands out to me that I really like feel bad for almost, like, as we're getting towards the end of this first rotation block, like. For one, I'm like I've mentioned in the past, I'm very happy that Yoda's had a chance to be in this position of like quote unquote domination in the meta. Like, and the card in this deck that really stands out to me that's in this spot, I'd like you guys to guess. What do you think it is?
The card that you wanted to stand. I'm going to guess it's Legal Authority.
I said Strike True.
It's Fen Rao. I've always really liked the way that card worked, where like you got to play an event, do something, cheat an action or so. I used to mess around with it in like the old Mandalorian deck in Shadows, but that's a card where I look at and I say, man, I wish that had a better run in this first block of rotation. But an interesting way to build this deck. I think it's a little more aggressive than a lot of the decks from Lamasu that I've seen. It looks like typically when you're seeing it's a lot of Sentinels, like a ton of Sentinels, trying to make it as grindy as humanly possible. Not to say that there aren't some Sentinels here like Lobot and stuff like
Lobot's
that, but
favorites.
the other ones have felt like it's been quite a bit thicker from that perspective.
Yeah, it's a cool interaction specifically in this deck because you're already loading up on upgrades due to your leader ability. So it just gives you another way to say, I want to take advantage of all the ways that I have upgrades in my deck. So yeah, it makes sense to have 3. And it's an ECL deck too. So he costs 6. So it's another ECL target should you not have your Vader. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So let's go over to this other one that Sharkey put in. This is from that same PQ
From the same
system.
tournament, yeah.
Some creative dudes over in New Zealand. The dog food that I feed my dog also from New Zealand. So shout out there. This reminds me of that Rose variant that we saw pop up at the end of Legends of the Force. Some additions that I'm seeing, at least probably the Survivor's Gauntlet, but overall it just seems like a pretty good yellow-blue shell. This is a color scheme that like I think is generally underplayed. I know obviously I'm a big Kaz blue guy overall, but a lot of burst you could do, a lot of defendable units, and a lot of things really playing into Rose's synergies here, Sharky.
Yeah, well, that and Sneak Attack Lightmaker is a pretty good haymaker for the finish there as well.
Totally.
So like I just think it's interesting seeing what maybe a familiar shell ran under a different leader than we're used to seeing, and it's always fun to see stuff like this. Like Rose is got avenues of attack that are different a little bit than Kaz, but it's the same idea. You kind of run the yellow blue, in this case vehicle spam, and make them do the most work that you can. So
Yeah.
I think that's fun.
What we're seeing a lot in these like really low to the ground aggro decks is that they're sideboarding, breaking in, and then just doing like a full swap for surprise strike. Kyle, do you think that's like an efficient use of cards in your 60, or would you try to just build around breaking in to begin with?
You're talking surprise strike versus breaking in?
Well, so what they're doing is that they're playing both in the 60, and then in matchups where they need to get past Sentinels and stuff, they're just doing a full swap surprise strike to breaking. It's always just felt like a little bit like foreign to me, even as I'm playing Sabe Tarkentown and stuff like that. I wonder if it's better in the long term to just try to play breaking in and build your deck from that perspective.
Yeah, in this deck in particular, it seems to me like a little odd because you're already a space aggro deck. and there's not a lot of Space Sentinels in the meta floating around, right? We're not seeing a lot of like the the blue Space Sentinels, that sort of thing. It's really just Bright Hope.
Yeah,
Bright
You're already a Space aggro deck. You could probably crash your way through one, maybe two Bright Hopes. So I agree with you. Maybe that just we didn't have better things we wanted to put in the sideboard here, but I feel like in this case I'd probably just go Surprise Strike and maybe keep the Breaking Ends away for something else. But yeah, I agree with you. If we were in like a really heavy Space Sentinel meta, even in that case, I'd probably just go Breaking In main instead of having the sideboard swap option.
That's the perspective that I'm looking at it from, where it's like if the other Sentinel besides Bright Hope that you're worried about right now starts with D and ends with Evastator.
Yep.
Right? Like it's not gonna matter. Like you having Breaking In at that point in the game, I don't think is gonna matter. I don't know. If it was me, I think I would run Breaking In main, not play Surprise Strike, and then try to find a different element in my sideboard for that card, right? The sideboard to me is a little bit odd here, just with, the Lurking Ties are kind of cute. You got Outmaneuver. Like, I also question just in general from like I've been playing Sabe a lot. Do you need Outmaneuver and Light Maker, especially when you're trying to, in theory, sneak attack a Light Maker in at certain points? But I don't know. I think if I was to play this, I would be reforming the sideboard a little bit and potentially just playing Kaz, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, you would probably play Kaz, but I still think it's cool that Rose gets her time to shine there a little bit.
Totally. And then the card that I've never seen in a competitive deck is this Royal Security Fighter, the 2/2 with grit. What do you think's going on here?
Well, I'll be honest. I have to look it up to see what that card says to be able to answer your question.
It's a 2/2
2/2 with grit.
Yeah,
That's
for
it.
2. The only thing I could think about is the Page Tico buff.
Yep.
Right.
That's what I was thinking of.
But
Yeah,
it's pretty tight with 2 HP.
I mean, even with the Page Tico buff, it's kind of counteracting your Rose ability, because when you're going off of the Page, usually you're hitting yourself with the Page, buffing up, but then you're cleaning it up with the Rose, so you can keep it rolling. So now I can't clean it up because I want the grit. I agree, a little weird, but it worked for him, I guess, right?
Yeah. So good stuff. Congrats on the top 7, top 8 PQ finish there. Okay, I want to go spend some more time on this Sabine Tarkentown deck. We saw it play on stream. I commentated a bunch of times. Like I said, go check it out or don't, whatever. I think that a lot of people look at this and they say aggro spam, but what I saw was just like a master class in aggro sequencing from Xavier, Osmi, and Blaze here. There were some turns that really had like my jaw on the ground.
Sequencing is another thing that I liked about it too.
Multiple turns where you had like the threat of taking a step back from the multiple turns. One thing that I really think this deck is interesting with is just like you're presenting these threats at different areas from different perspectives of the game, where like Fighters for Freedom isn't just a 3/4 that hits base. It's like your engine for the deck and providing pressure from one turn to the next. And then on top of that, the huge addition for this set was the Academy Disciplinarian combined with Benthic 2-Tubes, where you would go into the Sabine flip turn in this situation of having a huge board where you're able to dirtle actions. The Sabine action ability lets you do that a little bit successfully as well. But then all of a sudden you have your board, you do your round of attacks, you play Benthic, then you play Academy Disciplinarian, ready Benthic, buff another unit. It was really, really cool.
I think the specific time that I saw that was when Travi and I were commenting. It was, I think, against the Yoda Data Vault. And Yoda had done a good job of keeping mostly like the first turn double 1-drop spam in check. And then on flip, it was only Fighters for Freedom on the board. And we're like, oh, maybe Yoda does have a chance here because he felt safe enough to resupply. And then all of a sudden, it's flip Sabine, play Benthic, play Academy Disciplinarian, ready Benthic, do 1,000,000 damage in one turn. And that sequencing wasn't necessarily obvious that was about to happen to him until it happened. And based on just that one play line, I probably would be running more Disciplinarians myself. Like, that was really cool to see.
That's exactly
I'm
what I was
shocked that there's only one there, to be honest.
Yeah, there's only one main. You've got one sideboard. I believe he was on stream 3 times. I think we all got to cast this deck, which was pretty cool.
Yeah,
but
I loved it.
It seemed like it happened every time, right? It was like, okay, well, I don't know if this is just draw variance that's coming up, that sort of thing. I mean, a couple of cards that I saw him either resource or just not use at all was the flamethrower. It seems to me like that
I
could
was
just be another
shocked to see the
disciplinarian.
flamethrower in the deck list when I pulled it up this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
And
remember it being there.
the other one that you think, oh, this has got to be an awesome card in this deck is Aggression. And we talked about this on stream. I never saw him play Aggression.
Once.
Every time it was in hand, he was like, this has got to go. And put it down as a resource because he was just trying to go wide and slam more, one drops, that sort of thing. So yeah, I would be interested to see what he plans to change with this deck, if anything at all. But just looking at how it worked out for him on the play lines that I saw, I agree with you. Getting another disciplinarian main seems to make sense. Maybe a few adjustments here and there, but we'll see.
I wonder how much the flamethrower is like an answer to Cat Weenies.
I think that's what it has to be.
So it may ended up. I guess it ended up not mattering anyway because I don't remember there being that many in this tournament, and I don't think he ran into any of them. But that screams to me like that would be an answer for it.
Yeah, and it's also just a way to turn on your Tarkentown ping, I suppose. Right, like you don't really have that many great ways to ping here. Daring Raid obviously is in the 60. But yeah, really, really fun deck. I'm not sure about the sideboard overall. It's hard for me to look at a sideboard and see cards like A-Wing, Reckless Gunslinger, Hot Shot, like Cassian and Disciplinarian make a ton of sense to me, right? But I guess I look at it more from a utility perspective. But again, Xavier has won back-to-back PQs with this deck in two metas that never would have considered Sabine Tarkentown being a thing or a threat. So kudos to him. I played this deck 20 times this morning, really strong, but believe it or not, I wasn't able to successfully sequence as well as Xavier was in some of these games.
I think that's the biggest difference here, though, is it's not necessarily an easy one to pick up, but watching some of the sequencing that we got to see this weekend was really cool. It wasn't just, hey, what cards are in the deck? It's how did he play the cards?
Yeah,
and those were my favorite part.
I do suggest everybody go back and check those games out. The other parts, do it whatever you want, but this is good. All right, next one here is Han1 Blue. This is a deck that we played a little bit of it at Seattle, Kyle. We were messing around with it in the house. I played it in one of the Swiss events. Didn't have Bo-Katan in it. Again, I think that blue and yellow heroic is a little bit of an underplayed archetype at large, but really a cool deck to see pop up. Got second in this giant PQ out in Portland, I think 110 people. Really, really good field. In general, I just really like it. And the other thing that I really like is that you're seeing a lot of cards from these past couple sets, right? Like Vernestra, Deppa, Bo, Ezra. Obviously, you have the core of Han not being a thing anymore in a couple weeks, but overall, I'm really excited to see a deck like this pop up.
Yeah, this deck in particular, I'd say if you think aggro is really going to pop up in your area, give this deck a look. This deck smashes aggro, right? This is I'm going to kill all these aggro decks that are going to start thinking that they have some play, right? Just because you can cheat out larger resources, get beneficial trades, Fast Falcon, that sort of thing. You get Chirrut, you get the Itinerant Warrior to heal. I mean, there's just so many things this deck is doing that's going to really pose a real problem for some of these super aggressive decks should they become more popular.
And on top of that, it's probably the easiest heroic deck to turn on Anakin.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you could just throw one of those, with Han's ability, right? Just throw a Power of the Dark Side in the trash, and you've already set it up, right? Usually both sides of Anakin. Because even with Han 2 Blue, there will be times where I start Ogdo or Marin or something. I'm like, oh man, I don't even have a heroic in my discard pile. This stinks. This deck, you will always have Anakin, both ends of it on, easily.
Yeah.
One of the things I've found interesting about a lot of this cycle, and it includes some of the decks like this one, and the rise of the Cad Bane Weenies deck, is that we've called a lot of those the anti-aggro decks. And I think it's kind of interesting to see that the aggro decks that we see, or aggro or even fast mid-range decks that we see success from, are the ones that are also able to kind of just, it's almost like getting into a race and slashing the other guy's tires. It's like you just have an anti-aggro deck that is also fairly fast, trying to get into under the arms race of each of the other big decks that we're seeing.
Yeah, I would have to see how this does against a Yoda style, right? Because you don't really have many ways to get around it there. But I think part of what draws me to this Han 1 Blue deck in general is that it seems like relatively well insulated from a couple areas, right? One of them being, let's say, against CAD. Like, you have a couple good openings that you could play, or a couple openings that you won't get destroyed by playing, right? One being Secretive Sage. You have access to Ezra with a 3/5. Tech, worst case scenario, is a 2/5. There are things that are better than some alternatives there. Another aspect that's interesting to me is that in a lot of these Han decks, a lot of what your opponent's trying to do is stopping you from getting from 5 to 7, the typical 5, 6, 7. But in this deck, you have 5 of maybe the best 6 drops in the game, right? With Anakin and Depa for different reasons. You can get past Sentinels, you could pop shield. There's a lot of stuff that you could do with those 6 drops that you could make an argument that in certain situations, maybe they're better than your 7 drop options of Enfys and Luke, right? So I think from those perspectives, I just really like the ability to fight into other things. And then also when we have a unit like Vernestra and Han and Falcon, where we're just pushing damage in an archetype that doesn't necessarily have the most reach.
One. Yeah, so as you mentioned, we've played this deck a little bit. The challenge I really found with it was, if you're going to run into like a blue-green villain, this deck has a hard time, even into a grindy matchup like a Yoda, because it just can't go wide, right? You don't have Amidala, you don't have Keller in home one. You're really posing a lot of single targets, and that's what blue-green villain lives for, right? If you're going to throw single targets out there, I'm going to gobble them up, and then you're going to lose over the top. So, this deck is well positioned into a certain field or certain metas, but it does have some decks that it just gets crushed by, which is an avenue I don't like to play if I can avoid it.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking as I was looking at this deck, if there was a way to make it slightly more yellow to be able to maybe play Faith, but it seems kind of unlikely because of I don't think you could play. Let's look at it, right? You have 3, 6, 8, 11, 13, 16, 19, 21, 24, 27, 29. It's you would have to cut at least like 5 probably.
Yeah, I mean, Curtis was telling me at his PQ playing double yellow Han, he whiffed on Faith a couple of times. So if you're going to whiff on double yellow, you're definitely going to whiff trying to get it into this deck. So
yeah, there's not enough Faith or not enough friends in this deck.
Well, I mean, really you could swap the Waylays out for spares, which helps, right?
Yep.
You can. I don't know if you should, but you can talk about like liberated slaves for Ezra, right? It's not a force unit, so that's
I think you're at that point changing the entire complexion of the deck just because of you do need to activate the force with this one.
That would be the way that this deck can go wide, though. Like I don't know if there's another option there.
You could go the other Ezra, and then you're still force, right? Spark Ezra, but then you're losing the 5 butt, right?
Yeah.
So you're losing protection against the Tarkin Town deck, so it'd be a trade off.
When your other yellow 3 drop is also a 3/4 or a 3/4, and Vernestra and Han. But yeah, it's an interesting deck. The other thing that we found in our testing too was that like if Han 1 green ramped, it was a really a big challenge, right? So it is one of those things, but it's still a very fun deck to play. And I think, like Kyle said, if you are expecting a ton of aggro, this deck is a good option to think about. All right, let's move on to the next list that we'll talk about here. This is Phoenix, Arizona PQ. Kind of interesting they had a PQ this close to their sector. I wonder if that's just like bad scheduling overall, or before we dive into this deck, isn't that a little weird?
Yeah, you'd think you might be a little bit fatigued, although I'm surprised that they schedule PQs at the same day as sectors at all, let alone right around it or nearby on the same day. I mean, I guess you got to fit them all in somewhere, so it is what it is.
I also expect that it could just be, to Kyle's point, like some of those the non-local ones make sense because sometimes you just can't go to the sector, but to also have a local one a week later is a little interesting to me.
It brings me back to when we had the Denver sectors, which was a great event by all accounts. But we also had SCG Con Denver the following week, and just no one went. No one wanted to play.
Hey, I was there.
Didn't you? Okay, Paul, our teammate, brags about this still, about like winning money. But didn't you guys like split top 8 because no one was there, and you just like signed up and like there wasn't a pre top 8.
We did play, but we did split the top cut.
Wasn't it just 8 people though?
No, I think we split it less than that. I'm having trouble remembering because it's at this
I think
point
it was
been
8.
a long time.
I think it was 8.
We had a little more than 8, and we did split. I think it was a top 4.
Maybe it was like because it was a 2-day event. Maybe you went to the other event, the second one or something. I remember.
I went to the
split.
first one,
Okay.
and we split one that technically did have a play in. It wasn't by a lot. I think there was 10 people total. So
It was a dud. It was a dud.
Just in general, it feels odd. All right,
the dud is the one who showed up for the next one and didn't get to split.
Yeah. Okay, so Kyle, why the hell do you want to talk about this deck? What's interesting about it too?
Well, when this set came out,
disgusting.
The first deck I wanted to build was Kira Red. I saw Topple. Kira's my girl, and I saw Topple, and I go, I'm gonna make this work. I have been unsuccessful. I've tried so hard. I tried to do a force build. I tried to do another build, and the build that it turns out works a little. Got a top 8, so works a little. Was a heavy control build, and you guys know that there was no way I was ever going to build the heavy control. I just refused. Right as soon as I see restock in the list, I'm out. So I guess this is the way you have to build it. It's just not the way I would have ever tried. I just wanted to bring it up because it is a pairing that I wanted to see work, and I think it's cool that somebody got it to work. It's just in a strategy that I'm just not willing to play.
Yeah. I was also on the hope that it would work in not this form kind of, but like I was on that train.
I mean, this is disgusting hard control, obviously.
Yeah.
You did see
Congrats to them, but
you do see a couple of these builds early in the set that were like leaning more into the grit mechanic, and they were playing like Ogdo and Cynera San, the new upgraded unit and stuff like that. I mean, I personally don't mind playing this style deck, but even for me, this has too few units.
Right? If you want to hate your life even more, there's a variant of this floating around that also runs pillage.
Yeah. See, that's the one that sounds good to me. That's the one that I probably would play.
It's so boring.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about Lamasu. We talked about Rose. Here comes Cad Blue by Sharkey. The one thing that really stood out to me, there's two things, but one primarily is obviously Thrawn here in the top end, really interesting. But I love seeing how much Cicatro is getting played across these yellow decks the past couple weeks.
Fun.
I think obviously it would be better if he was a 3/5, but really, really solid unit.
So one of the things that I liked in Cad Green is that Cicatro and Miss Hunter together kind of offset a lot of either the Data Vault problem or just in general running a few more cards than 50. Another reason I picked this one is I actually really like a lot of the way Christian Toby plays Cad Blue, and so it's fun to see him do well again. This is kind of going the other direction that you can go with Yellow Blue Villain. This is not the Kira Red deck we just looked at. It's actually a mid-rangey kind of Cad deck that plays and you would recognize as a Cad Bane deck. So I like both of those aspects of it. It's interesting to see what got added from this set, which is effectively Thrawn. And obviously Grind and Cicatro, but Thrawn is a big I don't quite want to say it's Cad Bane number 4 and number 5 because it does have uses after a Super Laser Blast where you can just say, hey, look, I have it ready in it. What are you gonna do about it?
Yeah. Obviously, Syndicate Lackey's a great ambush here into Typho and stuff like that. But for me, the problem I've always had with these style decks is I just feel you get crushed by Blue-Green Villain.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's Blue-Green Villain. You get crushed by ramp.
Yeah.
At least we had a friend here who used to play like a Cad Blue or always want to play like more of a control-y yellow blue villain deck, and the problem was always ramp decks. Ramp decks would just get too far ahead, and then all these bombs would be coming too late, and then usually get closed out that way. So, I think that challenge still remains. You could try to snipe at, the ramp with Grindin and try to play fair and keep it close. But if they are able to ramp ahead of you, it's always been a real problem for this color pairing in Villain.
Mm-hmm.
I generally think that Blue-Green Villain's less of an issue from this deck's perspective if they don't ramp. And you're right. This one isn't necessarily it doesn't necessarily have a problem with specifically Blue-Green Villain, but it has a problem with ramp. So a deck that is ramping will be tougher for this one. And I think you kind of saw that because this is also the one that lost the Piet in the final.
Okay,
and that fair. would be the deck that you probably don't want to see in the final if you're playing a deck like this as well.
Well, I mean, this guy's clearly teched for a little bit more of a ground focus attack, playing Syndicate Lackeys, that extra four. It's basically not as good as Forlom, I don't think, but you're still, you're trying to get that extra ground ambush. It serves different purposes as well. Cloud Rider. So it's an interesting deck. I'll be interested to see if blue-yellow ever really surfaces as an archetype. Maybe in this new paradigm where like ramp is a little less given and you have to earn it a little bit more, maybe the style deck could survive a little bit better in this next set of rotation. One quick note before we hop out is that we are seeing Unrefusable Officer basically be like a standard in a lot of these CAD lists. So I just want to give Sharkey a shout out here. He's been doing that for years at this point. So good stuff.
I love that
there.
card. It's even easier to trigger in blue, actually. So
Yeah.
blue might be the easiest one to trigger it because you have power, you have fell, you have takedown, etc.
Yeah. So the last thing that I really wanted to kind of chat about today was just like setting the stage as we're potentially getting ready for regionals or whatever event you're going to in the coming weeks. Obviously, when you're getting ready for a big event, you want to set up your practice schedule. You want to make sure you're like working on things week after week to get you closer to that goal. For me, I usually start looking at these things a month in advance. That's basically what we are for regionals. So for the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about those steps. If you were doing it, Sharky and I aren't, Kyle is, so we'll kind of role play and do a little mock stuff there. But one thing and one trend that we talked about a little bit, but really we've been seeing pop up from Mesa and before, is that blue-green villain is kind of solidified around Kylo right now.
Yep, I agree. It's you have the choices of Plot Patine, Kira, a little bit of the Thrawn. I know you like, but it really Kylo seems to be the one that is just producing the most results at the highest level. It does one good thing that I really like, and that's cycling your deck. Although you could argue Plot Patine does the same thing. That really helps you when you're playing Data Vault. You need to see more cards. You need to get to those really important cards, to be able to win these games. But it's been an arms race, right? And so you can see with Loopy's deck here, that arms race up continues with blue-green villain. You see 2 main decked Annihilators. You've even got the main deck, Bounty Hunter crew, the restock. This deck is planning on going the long haul, right? So if you're preparing to play this deck, learn to play fast if you want to finish your games. But the downside of going all the way to the top of this arms race is exactly what happened to Loopy in the finals. He ran into the double red Sabine that said, I don't want to play past 5 resources. So good luck with all those cards.
Yeah.
Have fun ramping.
So, you mentioned Thrawn, you mentioned Plot, Palpatine, you mentioned Kylo, and I wish we had like a flowchart prepared or some sort of comparison graphic, because in reality, every blue-green villain deck right now, besides Kira and Gar, because Gar is kind of a different animal, right? We're not talking about that in this sentence here. They all can cycle, right? Kylo has his ability. Palpatine has his ability. Thrawn has its fleet of little minions with Cobb and Owen and stuff like that, getting to see a large chunk of your deck. The only leader that sees any relevance that doesn't have that ability to cycle is Kira, right? Which is just something to keep in mind in like the back of your head a little bit, right? And then as we compare and contrast some of the other pros and cons of these different archetypes and these different types of archetypes, for me, one of the reasons why I've been off of Thrawn this set is that I really think that as we get to the late game, and with blue-green villain, if you're playing another deck that wants to go late, you will go late, that I feel like the addition of Bo-Katan to these hero decks really messes with what Thrawn is trying to do from its Thrawn little weenies perspective, building these smaller units that are able to create a fleet and give you a little bit of an edge in these types of control matchups, right? But I do wonder with Kylo if it's a mix of all of those things combined together with the fact that this is the only blue-green villain deck that allows you to play cards like Snoke early with Palp's Return, right? Obviously, you could play Palp's Return in other ways. You could make it work. You could try to get discard going, but Kylo almost guarantees it. And I wonder if that's kind of like its quote-unquote ace up its sleeve versus some of these aggro builds.
Yeah, it could be really good. I think the other thing I would mention is that it gives you, like the Han deck we talked about earlier, a really easy way to turn on Anakin. And so against these aggro builds, being able to do that -3/-3 twice and being able to set it up almost automatically is a real help in those matchups too.
That's definitely true.
Yeah, and while there are tools here to help handle some of the aggro, like Childson and Slimore can kind of approximate that. I'm not sure that this deck, even with those tools in the deck, they're not fully spec'd out. There's not 3 of each of them, and it's a little bit harder to find still. So this one, if you're going to run this blue-green villain, be aware that if an aggro spikes, you're still going to have a rough day.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the comparisons that we get back to like Kira, where while she can't cycle her deck the same way, she can't do X, she can't do Y, the flip into CAD or flip into the old school Barrage, this deck's not even running Barrage, right? Like that's something that we don't see very often. It's running Craving Power instead. Obviously Kylo has a much better synergy with upgrades, but there really are no targets in the mid game besides, I guess, Childson, right? And if you're OBing a Childson, that means that one of the cards in your hand wasn't blue. So it's an interesting way to look at it. But yeah, I think we have seen it. Like I can confidently say that like this is the blue-green villain leader in the clubhouse that you need to be prepared to deal with, whether it's from getting under it or dealing with this massive flip that's going to happen in the PQ that we covered yesterday, what we saw in the finals, that the flip wasn't even a part of the conversation, right? Like the double ramp didn't matter. It's just Sabine going too fast for everything. Will a deck like Hantu ECL always be that way? Probably not. Like if you're playing Hantu ECL, you're likely going to have to deal with the flip in at least one of your games, right? Like you're not always going to be as hyper aggro as Sabine Tarkentown. You have to have some sort of way to get through that eventuality. Any other notes on this Kylo deck or just like the archetype in general?
No, I mean, honestly, it's one of those archetypes that I think a lot of the player base in general is happy to see the end of coming up with rotation, right? The standard play line of a resupply into this, into that. It is cool to see the totality of it. Like this is the end of this entire block of what this deck can be and has become. But it's pretty played out. I know what it does. We've seen it a number of times, and so this is how it ends.
Yeah, I think just
cool
like the slight differences here are that like there are some cards that I'm excited to see how they go in this sort of archetype or otherwise moving forward. Like for instance, I think Slies are a great design, right? Like I think that whether it's from a plot perspective or just an overall perspective, I think it's a really cool card. I would be sad if Sly didn't see play in the next year, right? And I would also feel that way about cards like Condemn. I think Condemn's a great design, right? Like it's just the right amount of annoying and just the right amount of risk that I think I personally like it a lot more than Entrenched.
I think the part that you point out here though, like for Condemn, is that it's punishable by a lot of the cards that have been printed already and that will continue, I think, to be printed. It looks like there's at least a few things that might do it.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can punish it with Garindon, for example. So I've literally used a unit that has been condemned to attack and then immediately call Garindon on that, just as an example there. The interaction part is the part that I actually am really excited about seeing. And I think like while I'm ready for this style, the style we just looked at, to be gone, I actually do like the blue-green Thrawn variant of it. Because that one actually also has a little bit more of an interaction style to it, as opposed to just saying, hey, look, I'm going to run every card that deletes a unit.
Yeah. Right, and I think that's fair. I do think that this archetype is probably the one that's going to see the most shift as we get past rotation. I think that there will always be types of aggro, whether it's in space or on the ground. The mid-range might get less grindy, more grindy. Right now, it's all based on value. Maybe that changes. Maybe it's a little bit more swingy or high risk. But I think that this type of game is going to undergo like the biggest makeover that we've seen in SWU so far. And I would also be shocked if this archetype just completely disappeared.
I think it's going to change quite a bit. I don't think it'll completely disappear, but a lot of the core cards are just gone. And some of the new stuff we're seeing, like the new Super Laser Blast, are pushing into red.
Yeah.
So it does feel like FFG is intentionally kind of pushing what this kind of core style was in a different direction. And I'm cool with that because we've had a couple of years of it, and so I want to see change.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And we still have a lot more cards to see from Secrets of Power. We could see the new Barrage that's worse. We probably won't, but it's possible. I think there's over 150 some odd cards still left to be revealed. So a lot going on in the spoiler side of SWU and a lot going on here in the channel. Like we mentioned, broadcasted our PQ, partnered with Late Night and Premier Games over this past weekend. And this pod is always brought to you by our friends over at Premier Games. You go over to premiergames.store, get 10% off your order with Colorado Cantina Crew in the checkout. Great stream, a lot of coverage for you to watch. On top of that, we have midday matchup coming up on Friday. Sans Jillian. We'll see if we'll get a sub or if Kyle will be on his lonesome. That could be fun. I think that would be a good introspective area, right? So we'll see what happens there. Stay tuned to the Discord as well as our YouTube post feature thing. We'll update you what's going on, what the matchup is, and stuff like that. Join the Discord, links in the description. We've had a great time since we've opened it up last week, so the more the merrier. Hop on in. And I think that's all we got. Any final notes from Kyle or Sharkey?
No, nothing else here. It was a fun weekend, you know. Hopefully we get to do more of the casting type stuff in the future, so I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool to have everybody pop in. We had Travi, who's one of our new teammates from Utah. He has a YouTube channel as well called Travi CCG. He did his first casting with us. Unfortunately, our buddy Carlos Yoda Killer had some car issues and wasn't able to do it, but we had Josh Snyder, Jeff Creasy, myself, Kyle, Sharkey. The whole crew was there. It was fun. I'd love to get more of the CCC involved in that. So people could stop asking me. I'm just kidding. I enjoy doing it, but I don't enjoy producing nearly as much. Shout out to anyone who does that long term. Next time I am teaching either Kyle or Sharkey how to do it, and that is final. Okay, that's all we got. We're gonna close it there. No rebuttal. I'm Jordan from the Colorado Cantina Crew for Kyle and Sharkey. Stay tuned, stick with us, and we'll see you next time.